Hello, my name is Ellie Zupnik with the Fix Our Senate campaign. I want to welcome all of you and thank you so much for taking the time on a Monday evening to be with us here today. We are at a critical moment right now. States across the country are passing bills making it harder for Americans to vote. Governors and legislatures are preparing another round of partisan gerrymandering that would skew the House of Representatives for another 10 years. As this is happening, Republican leaders in DC are preparing to block and filibuster the For the People Act, a bill that would take on this voter suppression and take key steps to restore our democracy. Thankfully, a growing number of Americans and senators understand what's at stake and the urgent need to act. But time is running out and we can't afford to be complacent. Momentum to eliminate the filibuster and pass the For the People Act is growing every single day. And thank you, Senator Warren, Senator Merkley, for your strong leadership on this. But we all need to dial up the work right now and fight like the future of our democracy depends on it, because it absolutely does. So now I want to turn it over to our moderator of tonight's town hall. Shaniqua McClendon is the political director of Crooked Media and leads our organization's Vote Save America, a volunteer-based program that works to defend, protect, and expand the right to vote. Shaniqua has spent years working in the House and the Senate, holds a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Shaniqua, I will turn this over to you to get us rolling.
Thank you, Ellie, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to welcome you all to Fix Our Senate's Filibuster Town Hall. I am Shaniqua McClendon. I use she, her pronouns, and tonight we'll be talking about voting rights and the choice between protecting our democracy or protecting the filibuster. That choice will come to a head very soon with the For the People Act, which would defend Americans from the 361 Republican-led bills introduced in 47 state legislatures that aim to restrict voting rights across the country. The movement to get rid of the filibuster has grown tremendously in the past couple of years, let alone the past couple of months. Momentum increases every day with more and more activists, thought leaders, and members of Congress coming out in favor of reform or elimination. I'm excited to have two of the leading voices of this matter, Senators Jeff Merkley and Elizabeth Warren, here to discuss just that. Later, Reginald Thedford, Deputy Political Director at Stand Up America, and Jennifer Mandelblatt, Partner Engagement Coordinator for Fix Our Senate, about how we can win our fight to eliminate the filibuster. Quickly, before we dive in, I'd like to remind you all to please like and share this live stream and let us know why you support eliminating the filibuster. Please feel free to share your story on social media and tag us at Fix Our Senate so we can amplify your message. And now, with that out of the way, I'm excited to start our discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Senator Jeff Merkley. A born and raised Oregonian, Senator Merkley has served in the United States Senate since 2009 and was previously Speaker of the House for the Oregon State Legislature. Senator Merkley has dedicated his career to standing up for working families, fighting to create living wage jobs, and pushing back on anti-democratic policies. He has been a stark opponent of the current filibuster for well over a decade, dubbed the greatest champion of our filibuster reform by the American Prospect. Senator Merkley now serves on the Senate committees on Appropriations, Environment and Public Works, Budget, and Foreign Relations. I'm honored to also introduce Senator Elizabeth Warren, a fearless advocate who has spent her career fighting for the middle class. Senator Warren is one of the nation's leading progressive voices, fighting for big structural change that would transform our economy and society as a whole. She brought the filibuster front and center in 2019, calling for its elimination throughout her presidential campaign. And I also voted for her. She uses her platform to hold our nation's most profitable corporations accountable, and she has been a progressive change maker for decades. Thank you again for joining both of us. Thank you to both of you for joining us this evening. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. And if it's okay, Senator Merkley, I'm gonna give our first question to you. Last month during his joint address, President Biden stated, "The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive. It did, but the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent." His remarks really capture the moment we're in right now, and I would love to know how you think Congress can fight back against the attacks on our democracy and racist efforts to suppress the vote, and what's standing in the way of that.
Daniqua, thank you so much for inviting me to join you and for bringing together through Fix Our Senate so many powerful grassroots voices, because we need it if we're going to save our democracy. We're not that far removed from January 6th, in which colleagues in the Senate and so many people in the House voted to burn the ballots of 80 million Americans. And now the effort to essentially disrupt future votes is well underway, inspired by former President Trump's big lie, the election was stolen, and converting that into a strategy to target specific groups of Black Americans, minority communities, low-income communities, college students, tribal citizens of America. And the reason they're being targeted is because they tend to vote Democratic. And so Republicans are saying, let's go back pre-1965 and use those strategies to block people from voting who we don't want to vote, because we want to win elections. And if we can win by stopping others from voting, then so be it. And you think about how this battle has dominated our country. Our country had this vision of equality, but in the beginning, it was so imperfect. Black Americans, Native Americans couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, the poor couldn't vote. And we worked to change that and fully embrace this vision of every citizen being able to participate in guiding our country. And we thought we got there. 1965, the Voting Rights Act, we passed it. Great. And now we're in some kind of a time machine where we've gone back pre-1965, and deeply embedded racism is just pouring out of the Republican Party to stop people from voting. So what can we do? Well, we have to have basic national standards, election protection standards, and those standards are in the For the People bill, S1, so numbered S1 because it's the most important bill we have in the Senate. And it does three basic things. The first is it defends the ballot box, the right and freedom of every American to cast a ballot. The second thing it does is it stops billionaires from buying elections. And the third thing it does, it takes on the corruption of gerrymandering and conflicts of interest. Gerrymandering is that redistricting, drawing your districts so that the politicians choose their voters in order to favor one party over the other, and thus destroys the concept of equal representation. But if you're thinking of two basic things to tell people what this does, stops billionaires from buying elections and defends the ballot box for every single American. We have to pass this bill, but to pass it, we have to have 50 votes plus a vice president, and we have to get rid of McConnell's, the minority leader's, ability to veto the bill. Now, let me explain this as simplest way I can. McConnell wanted to basically stack the Supreme Court with Federalist Society members who favor corporations over consumer advocates, environmental advocates, so on and so forth. And so he changed the rules by simple majority and created a pathway in which only 50 plus a VP is required, only 51 votes are required, simple majority required to change the Supreme Court. And then he wanted to pack the lower courts, so he changed by simple majority the rules to go from 30 hours of debate to 2 hours of debate, so he could do 4 confirmations a day. They wanted to do tax cuts for the rich, so he changed the rules so you could do it in reconciliation. And that means that the top priorities for the powerful in America are simple majority. There is no filibuster. There is no Democratic Party veto. But the priorities for the people of the United States, for thriving families, for healthcare, housing, education, living wage jobs, taking on labor law and taking on the Equality Act to end discrimination in the LGBTQ community, to take on climate change, all those policies, McConnell still has a veto over. So we are going to have 50 votes and a vice president for the bill, and then we have to change the filibuster so that McConnell does not have a veto. That's what we have to do, and the whole set of things we care about for the future of this country, the whole vision of we the people government of, by, and for the people, is dependent upon it.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you've made pretty clear that literally everything that is important to us is tied to this. Senator Warren, the next question I have is for you. You've been in the Senate, this is your 9th year in the Senate, and during that time, I would love to know what made you realize that the Senate didn't have to operate the way that it does, and that, you know, senators didn't have to be beholden to an arcane and obstructive procedural tool?
You know, it's a wonderful question. I'm going to describe this kind of the opposite way. I came to politics late in life. I spent all of my professional career as a teacher and a lawyer and a writer and a researcher. And my view, I had grown up with the kind of naive view that it's all majority rules, right? That the founders and the Constitution had considered supermajorities. You know, that maybe it should take 60% in the Senate or 2/3 or whatever. And they rejected it. They rejected it because it had failed in the Articles of Confederation. They rejected it because they realized you couldn't get anything done to make the country work. And so when I started watching, I really got engaged much more, obviously, in politics during the crash in 2008. And we had a supermajority, you may remember, in the Senate, a supermajority of Democrats. And you watch then as the Republicans, even in the face of the crash, even as the banks had cheated American families, as they had targeted communities of color, as they had cost people their homes, their retirement savings, their jobs, and as they had been bailed out to the tune of $700 billion. Nonetheless, the Republicans didn't want to engage in any real financial reform. They were still beholden to the big banks, and they were determined not to pass a Dodd-Frank. And so that's where you started to see, where I started to see it personally, the importance of you had to have 60 votes to be able to make change. Now, we had a lot of Democrats. We ultimately picked up 1 or 2 Republicans. But from there on out, from the time I got in the Senate, it's just been worse and worse and worse. By the time I came to the Senate, Mitch McConnell had already declared that his job was to make President Obama a one-term president. Obviously, he was not successful in doing that. But he used the filibuster during all of Obama's term to block everything that he possibly could. And that's when we get to the asymmetry of it. You know, I think of it this way. Democrats want to actually get stuff done. We want to pass universal child care. We want to cancel student loan debt. We want to change Social Security so that people in retirement don't live in poverty. And we want to expand the taxes on the wealthiest Americans. We want to do those things. But to do those things, the things we want to do to invest in America, the Republicans can filibuster. They can say, if you can't get 60 votes, you can't get it passed. Financial reform, if you can't get 60 votes, you can't get it passed. But think about what the Republicans want to do. Cut taxes, which they can always do through reconciliation, 50 votes, and deregulate, which they basically do through the agencies. So it's not as if we have this great symmetry that the filibuster keeps us from doing what we want to do, but it also keeps the Republicans from doing what they want to do. I saw this up close and personal when Donald Trump's one major legislative achievement was to cut taxes for billionaires and giant corporations, ultimately handing out a $2 trillion tax break that very, very little of it ever trickled down to the rest of American families. So I just think of it as Mitch McConnell understands the way that the filibuster can be used, and he understands the political implications, keep the Democrats from delivering on any of our promises, and he's going to use it. And frankly, I can't imagine that we'd be dumb enough to let him do that. We really have to stand up and fight back. And I felt that way. I felt that way for a very long time about the filibuster. But like I said, watching in action what they do when they have the barest majority, they cut taxes for the rich. And now recognizing we've made promises all across this country to American families. We've made promises to families who are struggling with childcare, who are struggling with student loans, who are struggling with healthcare costs and with housing. We've made promises that we're going to be in there fighting for them. And the idea that we would go back on those promises in order to help out Mitch McConnell and give him a veto over everything we do is just fundamentally wrong. I'm in this fight all the way. We have to get rid of the filibuster.
Thank you. Senator Merkley, Senator Warren kind of touched on this, but this question will ask you to go a little bit deeper on it. Something that I've heard a lot, and I'm sure both of you have heard a lot, is that if Democrats eliminate the filibuster, they'll regret it, because as soon as Republicans gain control of the Senate, they'll kind of go crazy. Is that something that you're concerned about?
No, I don't lose any sleep over that. And let me explain why. The first is that they can already do tax cuts for the rich by simple majority. They can already pack the lower courts by simple majority. They can already change the Supreme Court by simple majority because McConnell changed the rules on these things. So what do we have to fear? Well, yes, there's areas that I would disagree with their policy profoundly. It might be environmental policy. It might be healthcare policy. It might be, for example, climate change policy or reproductive rights, which is probably the one that people worry about most. But think about it this way. If we go back to that founder conversation that Elizabeth mentioned, they were writing the US Constitution at the time that they were paralyzed in the Confederation Congress where they required a supermajority. And so they said, you can't do policy that way because the whole premise of republic is that the pathway that the greater number thinks is the right path is the way you go, not the pathway that the smaller number thinks. You don't submit the will of the majority to the will of the majority to the will of the minority. And this is almost exactly the words that Madison said when in the Federalist Papers, saying, don't make that mistake of submitting the will of the majority to the will of the minority. And Hamilton said, you'll end up with contemptible compromises of the common good. If you do that. And so the theory was, yeah, a majority should decide. You don't always agree with that majority, but in our system, you have to have a majority in one house, the Senate, a majority in the other house, the House, and a signature by the president. It's already pretty hard to line up all three at the same time. And then if they're doing something that's really bad, there's consequences called elections. And so the elections come along, and think about what would happen if the Republicans compromised reproductive rights. They're terrified to do that in Congress. They'd rather do it at the state level. They'd rather do it through the courts, but they're not excited about doing it in Congress because elections would have a big impact and they would lose their majority. And then we would change that policy. Ultimately, you have to have confidence in the people. But that confidence takes us back to the importance of S1 for the people, because I don't have confidence if only the rich are voting. I don't have confidence if only the Republicans are voting. My confidence is vested in grassroots America, everyone getting to participate in the process. So no, I don't lose sleep over what the Republicans would do, because they can already do a lot, and the additional things that are part of the process. If we disagree, we will fight them, and if we lose, we will run elections on the terrible things they did. We'll win those elections and we'll change things back, as long as we take on the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, and the dark money by passing S1. And by the way, there's one other reason I don't worry about it. Let's say we don't change anything, and then the Republicans are in charge, and they really want to pass a bill. What will they do at that point? They'll change the rules again, regardless of whether we did previously. And that's what Mitch McConnell did on the Supreme Court. That's what he did on tax cuts for the rich. And that's what he did for accelerating appointments to the lower courts. So whether or not we do it has no impact on what he does in the future in that regard.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. As was mentioned earlier, I've worked in the Senate for 4 years, and if I know anything, Mitch McConnell is going to do what he likes to do. We're going to close out here and give Senator Warren the last question, but Senator Merkley, if you want to jump in, certainly feel free. This conversation has definitely, hopefully, made people understand why it's so important to eliminate the filibuster. So the big final question is, what will it take to eliminate the filibuster?
Thank you very much, Shaniqua. And the answer is, it takes you. It takes you and everybody who's watching us tonight. You know, as with so many issues in our democracy, we just have to keep getting out there and making the case. Look, it is hard, and I understand that. The moneyed interests, they line up with let's keep the filibuster because it keeps them powerful. They line up with let's not pass S1 for the people because it's going to reduce the influence of money. The racist underpinnings of the filibuster make it right back to the fore with the kinds of bills that are being proposed and passed in state legislatures all over the country. I really do see this as whatever issue gets you up, if it's gun safety, if it's Social Security, if it's childcare, if it's LGBTQ rights, if it's police reform, if it's income inequality, whatever it is that makes you say, I am engaged in my democracy, I care about this outcome, then you must care about the filibuster. You can't say, but I'm not a proceduralist, I don't care. So I think what we have to do is we have to raise our voices, we have to raise them loudly, and we have to bring in our allies, even if they don't recognize they are our allies. All of our friends whose first priority is to see immigration reform, they need to be fighting alongside us with real urgency on filibuster, getting rid of the filibuster. All of our friends who care about gun safety need to be fighting alongside us on getting rid of the filibuster. So I see this as raise our voices and get people centralized on the For the People Act, because this is our chance. We have the best chance in forever to actually get rid of the filibuster and be able to pass the kinds of bills that the American people want, bills that are widely popular. So that's a key part. The other thing I want to say about it, what we have to do as we raise our voices, is make clear that it truly is our democracy on the line. And we're not going to get a second chance on this. This is not something you were talking about, Shaniqua, and you were right, that when they get through with the redistricting, when they get through with the gerrymandering, when they get through with loading the dice in as many states as they can to be able to undercut the right to vote for tens of millions of Americans, to make it harder for them to be able to get to the polls, to make it harder for them to raise their voices, that's not something that then resets itself. And that somehow a few years down the line, oh, Democrats will come roaring back and fix it all. No, the threat is genuine and it is in front of us. So that is my third point. It's about raise your voice, bring in our allies. But the third part is understand the urgency of this moment. We cannot let this moment pass. We are talking about bringing this legislation to the floor within the next month or so. If we fail at this, we don't just fail for a few years. We fail for decades, for centuries. We fail our democracy. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to save our democracy. We've got to save our country. We've got to save ourselves.
If I can close with one final note, and thank you so much, Elizabeth. You framed it so well. And thank you, Fix Our Senate, for holding this forum. This is really the decisive battle between the vision of government by and for the powerful, and if that will what we'll have for the next generation for government by and for the people. Now, the powerful, the wealthy, they have hundreds of lawyers. They have hundreds of lobbyists. They run media campaigns to reshape public interest. They do, and then on top of that, they have gerrymandering, dark money, and putting up barricades to let people vote. We can't give them those final three advantages. They're still going to have the lawyers, they're still going to have the lobbyists, but if we want to see anything like the vision that should stem from every American being able to participate, this is the moment we have to win this battle. And so that we'll be on the floor either in June or July, a battle that may go into August. I hope everyone thinks about possibly when there's calls, grassroots calls to march on Washington. I hope hundreds of thousands of people will show up, because we have to win this battle. We need 50 votes, a vice president, and a pathway to overcome or eliminate the filibuster. And so that's the task, and the time is now.
Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing to make sure the filibuster doesn't continue to block critical legislation. We are forever grateful to you two, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks, Jeff, for all you're doing.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And now we are going to watch a quick video.
On the Senate floor, you argue the filibuster is not rooted in racism. Historians differ on this. Are you concerned about the perception? If it is used against advancing voting rights, certainly the public perception is that Republicans are going to use this tool to make it harder for Black people to vote.
Yeah, actually, historians do not agree. It has no racial history at all, none. So there's no dispute among historians about that. I make no apologies for opposing this bill. You've heard Senator Blunt outline the various flaws involved in it. This is all about a power grab. If it were related to civil rights, why were the Democrats using the tool last year and the year before that and the last 6 years? Why is it all of a sudden a civil rights issue when it wasn't for them as recently as last year? Honestly, with all due respect, that is nonsense. This is a power grab. It's all about trying to take over the American election system. It has all kinds of flaws. And under Senator Blunt's leadership, we're going to begin to point them out in great detail starting tomorrow in the rules.
Welcome back, everyone, from that short video. I'm not sure if you could hear it or not, but I can pretty much tell you what was in it. Mitch McConnell was telling a lot of lies about the filibuster, which we know he likes to do often. But with our next speaker, we're going to get to hear the truth about the filibuster's history from Reverend Dr. Stephanie Spalding, who is the founder of Truth and Conciliation and a leader of the Just Democracy Coalition, who will speak to how the filibuster has blocked voting rights legislation throughout our history and the consequences for our democracy if the For the People Act meets the same fate. Welcome, Reverend Dr. Spalding.
Good evening, and thank you, Shaniqua. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you. In that video, Senator McConnell is pretty much asked about the racist history of the filibuster, and he goes on to deny that there is any racist history. And then the video goes on to show all the ways that that is not true, and the filibuster has been used in the past. You actually have proof of that. You've worked with Demos and Just Democracy on a report detailing the filibuster's racist history and its harm for civil and voting rights. Can you walk us through the ways that the filibuster has successfully or almost attempted to suppress our democracy over time?
Absolutely. I don't know what revisionist history that he has looked at, but the reality is that early on, the filibuster was used largely to preserve slavery, and after the Civil War to support lynching, segregation, and voter suppression. The filibuster has been used primarily to block progress on civil rights and other social economic justice legislation that Black and brown communities have been fighting for like over 200 lynching bills, anti-poll taxes, and even it threatened the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 65. So there's a deep relationship to how racist the filibuster has been, or how racialized the filibuster has been utilized. In fact, the filibuster as we know it was innovated in 1841 by John C. Calhoun, the white Southerner who infamously defended slavery as a positive good, though we're hearing that even today, that some people think that there are positive elements of slavery. And so after him, we also saw Richard Russell, who, coming from Georgia, senator, talked about and believed any Southern white man worth a pinch of salt would give his all to maintain white supremacy. And he gave his all to thwarting civil rights with the filibuster. So it definitely has deep racialized connections, and Southerners, white people across the country have used the filibuster to block Black and Brown progress and democracy in general.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us. Building on that, the filibuster is often called a Jim Crow relic, and it certainly is a tool that was exploited by segregationists in the past, but we also can't divorce it from the present and the modern efforts that we're seeing to suppress Black and Brown political power. Why would you say eliminating the filibuster is key to the present fight for civil rights?
Absolutely. When we talk about those anti-lynching bills, over 200 anti-lynching bills, we still don't have an anti-lynching bill that has passed of both houses in Congress. And so when we think about the George Floyd Act, we need the filibuster to be eliminated if we're going to get that passed. It's blocking voting rights right now. So as we heard the senator speak earlier about the For the People Act, we can't get S1 passed if we don't eliminate the filibuster. Gun violence prevention, criminal justice reform, climate justice, all of these things are at the heart of what will drive our democracy forward and what Black and Brown communities are calling for across the board. And not just Black and Brown communities, but Americans are calling for. And we don't even get to hear a vote from our senators because of the filibuster being in place. The last piece that I want to talk about is the disproportionate representation and power to white voices that the filibuster provides. So again, we are looking at DC statehood and having 2 senators and representatives in Congress from a majority Black community, a Black-based populace, and they are missing every day in Congress. Their voices are missing every day in Congress, whereas we have in Wyoming less or just a little bit over 500,000 people in comparison to the 700,000 plus people living in DC who don't have representation. So we're seeing a disproportionate use and abuse of power as it relates to whose voices are elevated in the Senate.
Thank you. Thank you. Such important points, and a clear reminder that we're never too far from our history. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Spalding, for joining us today. And thank you so much for sharing your time. And now we're going to have another quick video for you all.
Our right to vote is under attack.
More than 100 bills have been put forward in state legislatures to try to claw back voting rights.
A bill was introduced to stop these attacks and protect voting rights. But now, with Senate Republicans threatening to block it, Democrats face a choice.
If all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, then that's what we should do.
Tell your senator, protect our democracy, not the Jim Crow filibuster.
I'm now joined by Megan Hatcher-Mays, who is the Director of Democracy Policy at Indivisible, to talk about what's happening with voting rights legislation, both locally and nationally, and why it's important, and why this moment is so important for passing the For the People Act. Thank you for joining us, Megan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Could you start by telling us what exactly is happening in states with voting rights and voting restrictions?
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture. There are, I think by last count, over 350 racist voter suppression bills pending in 47 states. So that's almost all of them. These bills are really aimed at preventing people from voting. These are bills in search of a problem. These are solutions in search of a problem, basically. These bills purport to make our elections more secure or whatever, but they really don't. Voter fraud is basically a non-existent problem. Like voter impersonation basically never happens. And these bills, that's kind of like the lie that these bills are based on. Really what these bills are all about is preventing people from voting. And that's what the senators were talking about before. That's what Senator Warren and Senator Merkley were saying. What Republicans have kind of based their future on is if you're not going to vote for them, then you shouldn't get to vote at all. And so they've really thrown their weight behind not winning over voters, but blocking people from voting at all. It's really, really scary. I mean, just a week ago, less than a week ago, the governor of Arizona signed a bill into law that could possibly purge 150,000 people from the rolls. That serves no legitimate purpose. It's just to prevent people from voting. These are aimed primarily at Black people, people of color, people who Republicans think will typically vote for Democrats. And again, instead of trying to win those voters over, they are simply making it more difficult or impossible in a lot of cases to vote.
Yeah, what you just described is kind of like we're reverting back to what Senator Merkley described as where our country started with voting rights, which is obviously unfortunate. And from what you said, what I'm hearing is that basically Congress has a ton of work that they need to do to fight back against voter suppression. And so my next question for you is something that Senator Merkley and Senator Warren touched on and may seem obvious, but I want to dive into it again. What legislation before Congress would help strengthen our democracy in light of these attacks at the state level?
Yeah, there is actually something Congress can do. So everything I just said that was scary, there are solutions to all of these things. So like the big one, of course, is the For the People Act. That's S1. That would start to, that would set a floor for how elections are run in this country. So it would require vote by mail. It would require, it'd make it easier for people to register to vote. It would make it easier for people to vote. It would help people who have a hard time getting to a mailbox or to the ballot to drop off their ballot. It would help them get their ballots turned in on time. That's something that the For the People Act would do. It's really, really critically important. And just like Senator Warren was saying, this is like, you know, crunch time. We got to get this done. We've also got the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that would restore the VRA, which the Supreme Court gutted back in 2013. That would set criteria. So states that have a history of racist voter suppression would have to pre-clear any new bad voting rights bills. They would have to get permission to implement those in advance before they could actually put those into practice, which is a great way to prevent really bad racist voter suppression bills from going into place in the first place. And the third is actually making DC the 51st state. The Senate is horribly disproportionate. It's really not representative of the country as a whole. And as a result, the Senate is pulling the country a lot farther to the right than the country itself actually is. So the way that you by making the Senate more representative, and the way that you do that is by adding states to the country. And you can start with the District of Columbia, where I live. 700,000 people live here without any voting representation in Congress at all. So we pay federal taxes. Today's tax day, and we have no say over how any of that money is spent. I would love that money to be spent on election security and additional drop boxes for ballots, but I have no say in that. So that's one as well. And then I'm just going to throw in as well, we really need to do something about our federal judiciary. So the reason that we're kind of in this mess right now is because the Supreme Court itself said it was okay, that it was okay for states to implement a bunch of really racist and unnecessary voter suppression bills. That was back in 2013 in Shelby County v. Holder. You really need to address that problem by fixing the courts, making the courts themselves more representative of the country as a whole. Because right now it's really, really conservative. Not just the Supreme Court, but the entire judiciary is very, very conservative because Donald Trump was very successful in stacking the court with Trumpian judges. So that's going to be really critically important as well.
Thank you. As someone from North Carolina who saw the immediate impact of the Shelby v. Holder decision. I completely agree with you. You touched on several bills that will have a tremendous impact on just democracy in our country. The biggest one, or most immediate one right now, is the For the People Act. And, you know, we've actually heard a bit of a timeline on when that could possibly happen. Senator Warren mentioned next couple of months, and Senator Schumer has even said that we'll need to get this done by August. But Senator Mitch McConnell is saying he'll do everything he can to block the For the People Act. So, you know, clearly it's not an exaggeration to say that Senate Democrats will kind of be forced to choose between our democracy and the filibuster to get this done. So can you speak to the choice that is in front of them right now?
Yeah, it's just that stark. That's exactly right. Either you pick an old Senate rule, it's not in the Constitution, it's not in the law, it's just made up. You pick that, or you pick a country that works for everybody. That's the choice. And we're really, really running out of time. Again, just to echo Senator Warren, this is the time that we have to get this done. We cannot miss this opportunity. And there's lots of practical reasons why that's true. People need to understand that states are going to be redrawing their congressional maps as soon as February of 2022. So if we don't get S1 in place, which bans partisan gerrymandering, by the way, if S1 is not passed into law and put in place in time for those redrawing process, states can gerrymander a Republican majority potentially for the next 10 years, even longer, until the next census count. We are running out of time to get this bill passed and to get these provisions in place so that states draw maps that are fair, that represent the people, and that we can have a Congress that actually works for everybody instead of a Congress that has been wildly gerrymandered to hand a majority to the political party that gets fewer votes. So that's how stark this choice is. That's how urgent this moment is. We really need to get this bill passed. It's good policy, but practically speaking, we're running out of time to make sure that we have a system that is fair.
Thank you so much, Megan. I think you really just helped clarify why this fight is so important and why it's so urgent. It's not something we can wait on, as you know, some people have implied, and it's not something we can let Mitch McConnell just decide that he doesn't want to let happen.
Correct. He's in the minority for a reason.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So before we let all of you go and, you know, get back to watching Netflix or maybe listening to some Crooked Media podcasts or hopefully reaching out to your senator, we have a conversation with Reggie Thedford, Deputy Political Director from Stand Up America, and Fix Our Senate's Partner Engagement Lead, Jennifer Mandelblatt. They'll be talking about how you can take action in the fight against the filibuster. Reggie, I'll pass it to you first.
Thanks, Shaniqua. And thank you, Fix Our Senate, for programming this wonderful event. My name is Reggie Thedford, and I'm someone that fights for the freedom to vote for all Americans daily. About 10 years ago, when I was an undergrad, I read about a case where an African-American man was put to death for a crime he didn't commit. This ultimately motivated me to go to law school, where I could learn the skills to reform our criminal system. But it was in law school where I saw the intersectionality between our democracy and the criminal justice system. And I saw that we can get criminal justice reform without building a better democracy, which is why I love serving as the Deputy Political Director for Stand Up America. Now, for those that don't know, Stand Up America is a progressive grassroots community of more than 2 million members across the country who are working to protect and expand our freedom to vote in undemocratic barriers that conservatives have built to block the progress that Americans need and build a more representative democracy. Now, one of those undemocratic barriers is something we've been talking about all night here, the filibuster. And as Dr. Spalding mentioned earlier, and as President Obama has said in the past, this wonky Senate procedure known as the filibuster is nothing more than the Jim Crow relic that has blocked and will continue to block common sense legislation that the American people want and need. We can no longer allow a minority of Republican senators elected by an even smaller minority of Americans to go against the will of the people. Americans overwhelmingly support legislation like the For the People Act and raising minimum wage. So when we hear some elected officials say that we're more divided than ever, yes, we're divided when it comes to our political identities, but not so much necessarily we're not so much divided when it comes to many important issues. Americans want the freedom to vote. They want voters to pick their politicians and not the other way around. And they want an accountable government. The filibuster is standing in the way of all of that. Now, you might be wondering at this time how you can get involved to end the filibuster. And you heard Senator Warren say earlier, it's going to take all of us to get this done. So let's talk about some actions. I'll provide you with a few, but one of the most simplest is calling your senator. So far, the Stand Up America community, has driven nearly 35,000 calls and over 40,000 emails to Congress, driving home the point that we can't let the filibuster stand in the way of passing legislation like the For the People Act, DC statehood, or other important reforms that Americans need. We're asking you to continue driving calls and emails to your senators. In order to do that, text filibuster to 21333. I'll spell that for you. Filibuster, FILIBUSTER to 21333. Now you'll receive a text message with the link for you to make that call. And when you click the link, you'll be connected to a recording that will provide you with a few talking points. And once you've had a minute to listen to those talking points, you'll be directly connected to your senator. Now, if you'd like to do more, you can write a letter to the editor, or also known as LTEs. LTEs are a great way to educate your community about particular issues, and it's also a way to be an advocate all at the same time. Go to our website at standupamerica.com and click on the Act button at the top. Then just enter your information, and you'll be able to choose from sending a letter to the editor, an email to your senator, or making that call. We make these actions as easy as possible in just a few clicks. Now, you might be wondering why it's important for you to take action if you don't live in a state like West Virginia or Arizona. Well, here's why. Not every other Democratic senator is as strident in their support for filibuster reform as Senators Merkley and Warren. That's why we need to create an echo chamber that no Democratic senator can ignore. And in doing so, we'll not only shore up the support of folks who are not as solid, but we'll also put pressure on leadership to make it a priority, and on Manchin and Sinema, by ensuring that their fellow Democratic colleagues are talking about it and pressuring them to get it done. And for those with Republican senators, don't be discouraged from taking action. Voting rights shouldn't be a partisan issue. And as a matter of fact, a lot of calls in support of the For the People Act and the Voting Rights Act were logged in Lisa Murkowski's office before she came out in support of the Voting Rights Act today. Those calls clearly didn't go to waste. You never know the effect of your call. Thank you again, Fix Our Senate, for this great event. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reggie. And everything Reggie said here tonight we're worth repeating. So I'm going to talk about more ways that you can take action and why it's so important to do so. In the last election, in the midst of a global pandemic, you all of you tuning in, found new ways to mobilize your communities to turn out in record numbers because you wanted to elect change. You wanted to elect leaders who would end gridlock and dysfunction. You organized tirelessly to deliver this election because you knew that making our voices heard at the ballot box is not the end of the work, but the beginning of a new fight, a fight to make good on the promises of progress on every issue that matters to us, from our schools to our workplaces, from our planet to our homes. You knew that in order to see that progress, it starts with a strong democracy. So you showed up in record numbers. Now that democracy, that ability to show up in elections to come, is under threat. Fortunately, as we talked about tonight, we have legislative opportunities to fight back if only our leaders in the Senate find the courage to eliminate the filibuster, and we use our inherent power as constituents to demand that they do so. And as everyone's talked about tonight, we all have a role to play. We know that the nation's eyes are on a handful of senators who have been vocal in their opposition or loud in their silence. But this is a time for bold leadership from every single Democratic senator to show party leadership that their caucus is with them and that the people are with them. So if your Democratic senators have said they support eliminating the filibuster, thank them and then tell them to keep getting loud. The more vocal they are about the choice we've talked about here tonight, the more unfathomable it becomes to allow a Jim Crow relic of our past dictate the future of our democracy. If your Democratic senators are unsure or stand in opposition to changing the filibuster, visit fixoursenate.org. Again, fixoursenate.org, or look up the nearly 60 incredible organizations who made tonight's event possible for talking points and resources to make sure your senators have all of the information about what's at stake and why it is within their duty and their power to make change. When you do this, it works. And the Indivisible Marin organizers are a testament to that. They organized, they made their voices heard, and Senator Feinstein's office responded. And if your senators are the ones launching those attacks on voting rights, pick up your phone, go to your contacts, go to your Instagram followers, go to your Facebook friends, and find at least 10 people who live in another state with senators who need to hear from them, and tell them what you heard here tonight. Send them the link you're watching right now and encourage them to speak out. The most powerful voices our elected officials can hear from are their own constituents, but we all, again, have a role to play in educating our fellow organizers and advocates and sharing the tools and resources so that they can make their own power heard. And I know you might be thinking, well, that's all well and good. I'm happy to contact my senators. But what do I say? The best thing, tell them why it matters to you. Remember, you showed up in record numbers to help them lead. So you can tell them that eliminating the filibuster to protect our democracy is what leadership looks like. But hey, life is busy, and honestly, any spare minute you find, you're probably just trying to get outside before the cicadas do. And so we've made it easy. Thanks to the leadership of incredible New York and national Indivisible organizers, the Fix Our Senate Partnership Network is making every Friday Filibuster Friday. You can go to filibusterfriday.com, again, filibusterfriday.com, that has a quick tool to make calling, writing, tweeting your senators just a few clicks away, prompts and all. And you don't have to wait till Friday because democracy can't wait. And that's just one of the many tools you can use to make your senators know now is the time for action. Across Fix Our Senate, a coalition of more than 60 organizations representing millions of Americans focus on issues from voting rights, the climate crisis, reproductive justice, gun violence prevention, healthcare, immigration, labor, and LGBTQIA rights. Organizations are working together to ensure that the promises of progress are not blocked by the filibuster. These organizations are leading forward, and we encourage you to plug in wherever you feel most powerful. Visit the About Us page at fixoursenate.org to find an organization, to get connected, and to get loud. Thank you for dedicating your power to this fight. We can and we will win this for our democracy. Back to you, Shaniqua.
Thank you so much, Reggie and Jennifer. And thank you to all of our amazing guests for joining us tonight. And a special thank you to Senators Merkley and Warren for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us. For all of you watching, you heard our guests. It only takes just a few minutes to take action, and it can really make a difference. Contact your members of Congress and demand they support eliminating the filibuster. If you live in West Virginia or Arizona, you will have your work cut out for you. But this is on all of us to keep getting loud so that all of our senators know that this is a priority. You can reach your members of Congress by dialing 202-224-3121. You can also write letters, tag your elected officials on social media, or send them emails through their websites. You can also check out fixoursenate.org for more information and resources. So make your voices heard and make it clear that the Senate has a choice. They can either protect the filibuster, a Jim Crow relic that only creates gridlock and dysfunction, or pass the For the People Act to protect our democracy. But they can't do both. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.